I want to talk about bandpass subwoofer enclosures, specifically fourth order bandpass enclosures. The first thing I'll say, I really don't feel like I'm an expert. I do think I know enough, understand enough to be dangerous. Um, I have a client who I'm building or have just built a fourth order enclosure for that has just been completed. He has not picked it up yet. And so I've been sort of focusing on fourth order enclosures for a little bit here to try and make sure I got it right. Let's talk about the reason that I do a bandpass enclosure. They're huge. It requires so much enclosure volume that I typically don't feel like they are optimized. You can get way more out of a ported enclosure. You can have way more drivers or larger drivers. You can put an 18 in a conventional ported enclosure and have it sized properly and end up matching the same size as like a 10 or 12-inch driver in a bandpass enclosure. And the output of an 18 in a ported box versus a 10 or 12 in a bandpass enclosure similar, with similar power ratings. And so I'm not an advocate of bandpass enclosures like that they are superior. It's situational. And one of the situations where I believe bandpass enclosures are very useful is in the trunk of like sedan cars. If there's a way to access the main cabin area and port all your acoustical energy into the main cabin area and prevent the trunk and trunk space from being acoustically loaded and rattling, that's a win. Some of the trade-offs that I'm not a huge fan of is the narrow bandwidth tendencies. One of the compromises is that yes, you can get higher output than other conventional enclosures, but at the cost of narrower bandwidths. Depending on what you're doing, that might be fine or that might be a desirable situation. Let's talk about, let's see here. Let's talk about what I think technically is the way to go about a fourth order, specifically fourth order bandpass enclosure. So a fourth order enclosure has a sealed chamber and a vented chamber. And the bandpass therefore has a high pass filter and a low pass filter. The sealed chamber is the high pass filter, meaning that the usable frequencies that come out of this enclosure from a low frequency cut is configured by the sealed chamber. And the ported or high frequency chamber sets the low pass filter, what frequencies pass below the tuning frequency of the high frequency chamber. I hope that made sense. But how exactly do you get a tuning frequency out of a sealed chamber? So when I design a fourth order enclosure, everything's a compromise, and the first thing you need to do is what's your available space. And you size a driver based on your available space. But the client I have has already chosen a specific driver, and we already have a limited enclosure space available. Before I talk about all of that, I want to talk about the designing of a fourth order enclosure. So let's talk about how do we determine what the optimum sealed chamber size should be. A plug to Socket Car Audio. He's got a YouTube channel. The guy sounds Australian. I'm not an expert in dialect, but he's got a video he uploaded only 5 days ago from the time that I intend to upload this video. And the video is entitled How to Calculate the Right Box Size for Your Speakers. He breaks down the math equation associated. It's beautifully done. His content is very good. I recommend his content. I recommend this video specifically. So if you watch this video, you'll get much more educated about how to size an enclosure. This video he makes, and what I'm talking about, is specifically referring to sealed enclosures. Essentially, the smaller the enclosure is, the stronger the air spring effect, and you'll get a tighter, more punchier response. You also get less low frequency extension. The larger the box is, the less acoustical air spring support you get, and the lower the frequency, the more the driver is able to radiate in lower and lower frequencies. You get higher and higher amounts of excursion because the air spring decreases. Well, standard of industry, somebody determined, and I don't know who determined this, limitations of my knowledge, is a QTC value of 0.707. And roughly what I understand that to mean is that somebody determined that's like the sweet spot of having low frequency extension and tight punchiness of your bass sound. But if the enclosure is larger than that spec, you'll get a lower frequency extension and what I think a lot of people refer to as a sloppier, less tight bass sound. And the smaller enclosure you go from that point, it only tightens up and makes your bass punchier. That's really all I can say about that. And when I model enclosures, like let's just say sealed enclosures, I will literally model a series of different size enclosures based on the amount of power I have and the thermal handling of my driver. I will size the driver so that it models to achieve peak excursion at the lowest frequency that I'm aiming at with that given power. And the QTC value ends up being somewhere between 0.4 and 0.6, which is a larger enclosure than the covetous 0.707 QTC value that is like super common. That's at least a little bit of content regarding the low frequency sealed portion of a fourth order bandpass enclosure. This is another thing I don't fully understand. There's standard of industry, or the rule of thumb is that you have a 2-to-1 or a 3-to-1 ratio for fourth order bandpass enclosures. Like that's just some, and I don't fully understand that. What I do know is that if your high frequency chamber is too small or is quite small, it makes it harder to get the right vent velocity, the right port size, so you get a healthy vent velocity for your high frequency configuration. And so it does kind of make sense that you have double or triple the volume so that the port can be easily sized to accommodate passing all the frequencies through it that you need to. And that really is the only content that I have for the high frequency side. You just want that the volume of that one to be large enough that your port is manageable. If there's specific science to why the 2 to 3-to-1 ratio is highly desirable, I honestly don't know it. You'll have to keep searching the internet for those answers. I can't tell you how to be successful, and it really is roughly using that golden ratio. Let's see here. In this video, I do want to cover the enclosure that I built and show you some of the compromises that are made and how potentially detrimental they're going to be. The specific driver that my clients got is this Rockford Fosgate Power 13-inch T2. It's a monster. It's their flagship series, and it's their smallest driver that they make in this series. They've got a 13, a 16, and a 19. This thing's absolutely incredible, way out of my price range, but it's a really phenomenal driver. So this is the driver that we're going to use. Let's talk about the environment that we're going to put this in. The vehicle, this really is roughly the correct trunk for where this enclosure is going to go. There is an opening in the back seat where like the center console, or there's an armrest that folds down, and this is a direct vent into the main cabin area of the vehicle, which when I saw that, I told the client this is ripe for a bandpass enclosure. His current setup is a 15-inch sub. It's the box enclosure too small, and he doesn't get low frequency extension that he wants, and it rattles the trunk a lot, and it's just not ideal. And so he's got that Rockford 13-inch driver that he wants to install in here. Some of our design limitations. There's an odd shape, this little archway here, if you can see it through the video. It's about 8 inches of depth, and without making an incredibly complex enclosure, it's hard to accommodate that space. Conveniently, client has his amplifier laid in that space, and his current box is much larger, but leaves that 8 inches for his amp to sit on the floor of the trunk. We're gonna replicate that, and the enclosure ends up being about 31 inches wide by 24 inches deep by 16.5 inches tall. And we already test fit before I glued the enclosure together. It barely fits with those dimensions. Like, we kind of have to put some elbow grease into passing the enclosure over this plastic paneling. So any larger, and we may not be able to get the enclosure to fit. And it essentially takes up most of the trunk. He says that he puts his work boots in the back is the only thing that he wants the trunk for. And the shape of the enclosure allows access to the sides where he can still put a couple of different things. So it's not a completely useless trunk after that. One of the design flaws that we run into here is that this 8-inch, this section here requires our port to be 8 inches long at a minimum, because otherwise we would be venting that acoustical energy into the trunk. And we're going to try and butt that port right up against this and make sure all the acoustical energy is fed into the main cabin of the vehicle where we want it. So one of the design limitations is that unless we built a substantially more complex enclosure, we got to have a port that's 8 inches long, and we've optioned for a round port, even though this is a square opening, that's an 8-inch diameter round port. So that's the first design limitation. And then we've already laid out 32-inch wide, 24 deep, 16.5 tall. That's the volume we have available for this bandpass enclosure. So what we've got to determine is what the proper sealed portion, sealed chamber should be for this driver. Now, it just so happens that Rockford has recommendations. Their sealed chamber design recommendation is to have a 1.85 cubic foot internal volume. I don't know if they list the QTC spec. Oh yeah, they do. They list it as a 0.54, which I think a 0.4 is really good for low frequency extension, and a 0.7 is supposed to be that tightest, sharpest response. So this actually is representing a pretty low frequency focused sealed enclosure. I admit my first thoughts was with a 13-inch driver that 1.85 cubes seems small to me. To me, I don't know, 2.5 cubic feet seems more realistic. But they in their website that they have, running that driver at the full 2,000 watts it's rated for, the excursion. Let's see, where's it at here? Oh, I don't have it here. This driver is rated to have 34 millimeters of excursion. With the enclosure size that they recommend, they say will never exceed that excursion, clear down to 10 hertz. Excuse me. This is what they recommend. This is what Rockford recommends is 1.85. If we increase the enclosure volume, we start to increase excursion for the same amount of electrical energy. And if I make this enclosure 3 cubic feet, what's interesting is that Rockford's website, they're suggesting that at 15 hertz, we're going to reach peak excursion at 2,000 watts. Based upon this, I actually believe that the right enclosure volume for us to have peak output, which is based on displacement, we want maximum excursion at the lowest frequency we could ever imagine playing. And as far as I'm concerned, 15 hertz is down there. I personally have not found rebased tracks that it's that's low. And if you want to go lower than that, your enclosure's got to be bigger than that. But I actually think that based on this is ideally we want 3 cubic feet for the sealed portion. Which with the golden ratio of 2-to-1 means we need 6 cubic feet of internal volume for the high frequency chamber. That means 9 cubic feet total for this enclosure to be optimized for low frequency extension down to 15 hertz and get the most out of it. We don't have that much available space. What we do have is right about what Rockford recommends. And so that's kind of convenient because I can adhere to Rockford's recommendation for a sealed chamber and make it fit in our application. So let's look at modeling software now. I have modeled. Let's model one more thing really quickly. I want... that's not what we want. VB. Okay, yeah, that is what we want. I want to go freaking 3 cubic feet, baby. All right, let's accept those parameters. Okay, so I've got 3 enclosures that are sealed, modeled with that driver. Let's take a look at them. This is basically the 0.7 QTC enclosure size, which comes out to like 0.6 cubic feet, which is tiny. And so that golden ratio that is talked about, this is how that models. I'm actually going to zoom in here. Let's give you guys a little bit better view of the graph. The graph. Is that good enough? That's probably good enough. This is how that's Rockford driver models at 0.73 QTC. Cone displacement is very low. It's obviously a 0.6 cubic foot enclosure. It's tiny. Let's model what Rockford recommends. Their recommendation is 1.85, and that is represented here. So with their recommended enclosure size and a QTC of 0.5, we get 5 dB more output from 40 hertz below, which for all intents and purposes is fully desirable. And then cone displacement, we're still, then we get back to what I think is a flaw in this modeling software. I believe that this modeling software is It's inaccurate one way or another. I believe that what models at half of peak excursion is where we actually achieve peak excursion in the real world, which means that half of 34 is 17 millimeters of excursion. I want to model something that represents 17 millimeters of excursion in this modeling software is what I would believe actually gives us 34 millimeters of excursion in the real world. So to my surprise, Rockford's enclosure, the way this models, it says we're getting, at, let's see, 10 hertz, we're getting 26 millimeters of excursion. Let's go back here. It's close to the same representation. What Rockford's website, they say we're getting 39 millimeters of excursion. So it's not horribly off, but it's off. I modeled what I consider so let's go back here real quick, guys. Oh, shoot, you can't even see that anymore, can you? I'm so bad at this. There's no way I'm ever going to be successful. No one's going to want to watch these videos. When I put an enclosure together for this driver, it's 3 cubic feet. It shows that we get a 15 hertz extension down to 15 hertz before we have peak excursion, right? So if I go back to the modeling software, excuse me, look at the hiccups. Let's model a 3 cubic foot enclosure. That is going to be depicted in pink. At 5 hertz, the modeling software says we'll be at 32 millimeters of excursion. At 10 hertz, it's closer to, 30 milliliters of excursion. Yeah, about 30 millimeters of excursion. So modeling software is about 4 millimeters conservative compared to what Rockford's website's showing. That's interesting. And I would claim that my experience with this modeling software is that it's about 50% off of what reality actually represents. I'm either just not that good at running this software, or this software is just not that accurate. That's a good question. How does this model to go from a 1.85 to go to just under 2 cubic feet to 3 cubic feet? We're only gaining about 2 dB SPL from 20 hertz and down. So, and then it's a substantial amount more excursion. I'm not convinced that, I don't know, I think I'm a little bit surprised, but based on this, I'm not that offended that Rockford, something like 2 cubic feet would probably be really good for a bandpass enclosure. And it would give us a little bit of a cushion, right? Because I don't necessarily want my client to be right on the verge of blowing up their driver by over excursion. And so you shrink this enclosure down to, let's just say, 2 cubic feet. That gives us a little bit of headroom. Is that ideal? Is it optimum? It's situational. Let's look at, so I have modeled our enclosure in bandpass format, which is going to be this purple trace. Oops, sorry, that's not what I wanted. It's going to be this purple trace here. Bam. What is wrong with this design? We have a low pass of 43 hertz, which means that this bandpass enclosure is roughly from 5 hertz to 43 hertz. Not really optimum for bass. Most of the time we want extension up to 80 hertz, right? What is this situation? This is a direct result of that port having to be 8 inches in diameter and 8 inches long. So I did model this enclosure. Let's look at the enclosure. I sort of drew it. Let's look at what I drew here. Let's see here. Can you see that? This is this is the way the enclosure looks. The sealed portion here, driver mounts there, and then we've got a cover that goes on to seal the chamber, to seal the driver off. This is the vented enclosure. So this is 1.85 cubic feet internal. It comes out to 7.25 inches. So if it's 31 inches long, 16.5 high by 7.25 internal, we get we get 1.85 cubic feet internal space. I went ahead and put just a little bit of acoustical batting material. What do you call it? Damping material in here because I had it, and I think that it's not going to hurt anything. It'll sort of simulate that chamber being a hair larger, which I don't think is going to hurt anything. This comes out to be 5.25 cubic feet internal after calculating the displacement of the bracing and the driver. The driver's huge. It's basically 0.25 cubic feet of displacement. This comes out to 5.25, something like that, which is in between the 2-to-1 and 3-to-1 golden ratio. But again, this is a design flaw. The fact that our port has to be 8 inches long, that limits our high frequency extension substantially. I'm hoping that the amount of low frequency that we get is what the client was hoping for, wanting, and that venting all of our acoustical energy into the cabin and not rattling his trunk outweighs the fact that we will have some mid to upper bass frequency like withdrawals for all intents and purposes. What else did I want to look at here? I have modeled, let's clear this because it gets cumbersome. I have modeled what I consider a proper high frequency port tune, and that's depicted here. So instead of 43 hertz, 53, 63, 72, we get extension clear out to about 70 hertz. And all I did was increase the port from an 8-inch diameter round port to a 12-inch diameter round port. That also gives us much less vent velocity, which is a good thing. We haven't necessarily reached chuffing, but we're not far from it at peak output. So a way that I would overcome this is like if this has a really loud peak and then there's some roll off, what you can do is, depending on your DSP capabilities or your tuning, you can start rolling these frequencies off, 10 or 20 hertz before this, and you can actually dampen that output. If it's going to be super peaky up here, there are ways to dampen that with like your crossover configuration and get a nice flat response. Yeah, have we covered everything I think needs to be covered? I put a plug in to socket car audio. His content's good. I put a plug in for the fact that Rockford's got an active ability to do active tuning on their website. That's kind of cool. We demonstrated how a couple of different enclosure sizes are modeled for, sealed enclosures are modeled to, small, medium, and large, how they model. I'm still motivated to design the low frequency side so that we get peak excursion at peak power without over excursion, and that needs to be at the lowest frequency we intend to play. I wonder if I randomly ever keep any of your attention, can we model? What do I want to model here? Let's do this. I wonder if that recorded or not. My battery's almost dead on my phone. I don't feel like modeling that. I think I'm going to call this video good. I think we've got content on fourth order bandpass enclosures. I think we talked about them enough. Man, I really don't know. This honestly is my second attempt at this video, and I'm not sure if I'm any more impressed with the results here. I showed you the enclosure that we built. Until we have a chance to actually test it, I won't be able to tell you what the actual response real world ends up being. But I do expect to have lower frequency extension than the client had before. All right, well, I'm done rambling. Hopefully there was some useful content for any of you out there.